A monk has a secret. Count Tischendorf stood with the sheet of vellum in his hand. His search was ended. These priceless pages, written in Greek uncial letters, were part of the Old Testament, which must have been copied by some scribe more than 1,500 years before. Finally, Tischendorf realized that the librarian, perplexed by his silence and impatient with delay, was speaking to them. "Are you ill, sir? Perhaps your trip across the desert in the heat was too much for you." But Tischendorf was thinking of what the librarian had said about this basket of parchment. "Did you say that these were to be burned, and that 2 baskets of parchment such as these had been burned already?" interrupted Tischendorf. "Yes, but why does that concern you? And why are you alarmed? They are of no value." "Sir, I pray you, do not burn these parchments." "May I have them?" Tischendorf picked up more of the sheets. "As you have said, they are of no value to you. I will save you the trouble of burning them." Tischendorf was so excited that he could hardly breathe as the monk slowly examined a sheet of parchment. He seemed to be wondering if the sheets were of value, since the count was excited over finding them. He was too wary to be tricked into letting them go if they were of value. "I must ask the patriarch," he decided. The patriarch finally agreed to let the count take 43 sheets of parchment from the refuse basket. Tischendorf felt ill to leave twice as many sheets in the basket as he was allowed to take. Here, almost in his hands, was a priceless treasure, equal in value to the great Codex Alexandrinus in London and the Codex Vaticanus in Rome. This was more valuable than the dim stained pages of the Ephraimi in Paris. Still, he could not take it, and the treasure must be left with these monks who had no idea of its value. Before he left the monastery, Tischendorf tried to persuade the librarian to promise that he would burn no more pages, no matter how old the book appeared to be. The count hurried back to Europe with his precious parchments. There he read the pages and found that he had several books of the Old Testament. He had these published so that Greek scholars all over the world could read them. People were excited to think that parts of another famous Bible had been found. They urged Tischendorf to tell them where he had discovered them, but he carefully guarded his secret. Someday he would return and try to obtain the rest of the sheets. Year after year, Constantine Tischendorf planned to return to St. Catherine's Monastery. He must buy the rest of the parchments. The fear was with him instantly that someone might destroy the precious pages. After 10 years, he again came to the high stone walls surrounding the monastery. He was greeted pleasantly by the patriarch, who remembered when the count had visited before. But the monks were cautious and did not let him see the old manuscripts. The monks had learned something of the value of the pages, and they did not trust him to look at them. At last he found one sheet of parchment from Genesis among some old scrolls. This made him believe that the whole Bible had been in the monastery at some time. Disappointed, he returned to Europe, but Tischendorf could not give up the search. He thought of those 80 pages he had left in the great basket of refuse. Surely with God's help he would find them. Finally, the Emperor of Russia became interested in the work that Tischendorf was doing. When he heard of the 80 pages still left in the monastery, he paid the count's expenses for another trip back to Sinai. It was winter 1859 when Count Tischendorf crossed the desert and entered the monastery. It was bitterly cold in the damp stone buildings, and the count suffered in his bare cell. Day after day he searched for a trace of the pages, but in vain. At last the day came for him to leave. He made arrangements to have a camel and a guide come for him in the next morning. It is no use to stay any longer, he sighed to himself. I must be satisfied with the 43 leaves of parchment, and thank God that these were spared from the fire. But the rest must have been destroyed. That last evening he walked in the monastery garden with the steward of the convent. I hear, the steward remarked, that you have seen and read the Codex Alexandrinus. Yes, the count answered, I have read that ancient Greek manuscript. I am a religious man and interested in the holy book, replied the monk. Then quickly changing the subject, he said, Won't you come to my room for refreshments? The air has chilled us to the bone, and I will prepare something warm for us to drink. Because the evening was cold, the count accepted the invitation and followed the steward to his room next to the kitchen. While his host prepared the food, the count spoke again concerning the old manuscripts which he had read. And I, too, have read an old Greek Bible, the steward said. Perhaps you'd like to see my copy. Here, let me show it to you. Without waiting for his visitor to reply, the steward reached up to a corner of the room and took from the shelf a bulky volume wrapped in red cloth. He placed it on the table in front of Tischendorf. You can be sure that this edition is not as new and as fine as yours, apologized the steward. Tischendorf lowered the mug from which he had been drinking and placed it to one side. The ages do not change truth, my friends, said the count. In the dimly lighted room, Tischendorf carefully unrolled the red cloth cover from the volume. The steward commented, During the long winter evenings, this book has been my companion. Move the candle a little bit closer, Tischendorf urged. There now, I can see. He stared in silent awe at the parchment pages, but this time he controlled his feelings. There, by the flickering candlelight, he saw the very pages for which he had been searching for over 15 years. They were the sheets he had not been permitted to take from the library years previously. It seemed a miracle to him, and he thanked God in silence. The steward asked, Well, what do you think of it? Interesting indeed, came the casual response. I would like to look it over when I have more time. Here, have some more warm drink, said the steward, refilling the mug. Whenever you wish, you may borrow it. It will bring you comfort and pleasure. May I take the manuscript to my room this evening? Certainly, replied the unsuspecting monk. As soon as he could leave without showing too much haste, Tischendorf went to his room and laid the priceless treasure on his table. There, by himself, he gave way to joy. He knew that he held in his hands one of the most precious biblical treasures ever found. Tischendorf could not sleep. Unaware of the cold, he spent the entire night reading. He found not only those very 80 pages he had seen in the basket by the fire, but also the complete New Testament. In the morning he sent the camel driver away and stayed on to talk to the patriarch. Finally, after much conversation, he was given permission to take the manuscript to Cairo to be copied. The Bible was given the name Codex Sinaiticus because the book had been found near Mount Sinai. Tischendorf spent the spring and summer in Cairo copying the book. In September, he returned it to the monastery as he had promised. Then, through the influence of the Emperor of Russia, the manuscript was loaned to the library in St. Petersburg. Tischendorf at last had the complete Bible where he could study it. He had the pages copied and published so that all Greek scholars could read this wonderful Bible. Because of the devotion of Count Tischendorf, the desert had yielded its secret, and the world had a new treasure. This led other men to search in monasteries, caves, and in desert sands, where it was hoped greater treasures might be brought to light.